Hey, Fredonia Hill, this is Hunter Hampton. Great to be back with you this week for our Sunday school video. This week we're going to be talking about Luke 12, verses 13 through 34. In my Bible, the subheadings for this week are the parable of the rich fool and do not worry. And kind of pull back the curtain on how we got to this point. Matt asked, the different Sunday school teachers to record these videos back all the way in May. I guess if you roll it back even farther than that, the writers of our curriculum, selected these verses and studies at least a year ago, and it just hit me today as I was preparing and for our Sunday school meeting, about just how relevant these verses were to me and to my life, and I think so much in our world today that was obviously set forth a long time ago. Because if there are two things that I am particularly skilled at, I would say it would be being foolish and being worrisome. And so I feel incredibly underqualified to be talking with you about these verses, and I definitely have not mastered anything in them, but I do feel like they're incredibly relevant to our world, and I hope to provide you all some good questions and that y'all can have some great discussion about applying these verses to our daily lives in our current moment. All right, so let's jump into Luke 12, 13 through 21. It says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbiter over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up the treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." In this moment, we have an interesting kind of story about Jesus and his interaction. This parable starts with someone, right? And that someone is just referred to as someone yelling at Jesus, "Hey, tell my brother to divide up the inheritance so that I can get some of my family money." And in that moment, Jesus kind of responds to this person in the crowd's greed, obviously by telling him this story of a rich man whose crops are producing so much. And in this moment, the rich man's fields that produce, his response, I think, is very much a response that I think that Americans and American culture really perpetuates, is just bigger is better, right? He's like, "Well, I've got all this, I might as well just tear all of my barns down, and then I'll build bigger barns, and by having more, it will be more, and then I can just store it all up, and then I can honestly just retire," right? Stockpiling all of these goods and all of these things, kind of his early retirement plan, and just to do whatever served him and his good, right? The famous "eat, drink, be merry." And at the time of Jesus telling this parable, and in that first century context, this was a time of extreme poverty in the region, extreme poverty kind of throughout, and the idea of having this much would have been truly astounding. Having enough to not have to work anymore. A time of incredible food uncertainty, and we see Jesus providing food throughout his ministry here on earth. The fact is, this person, this rich landowner, could have done and grown enough to simply not have to worry about it. Would have been a sign of extreme wealth at the time. And then, as this man is kind of preparing all of his ways, the story kind of takes a bit of a morbid turn, and God tells him, you're not going to see any of this come to fruition. You're not going to see your barns. You're not going to see all of your earthly goods. You're not going to see all of this wealth on earth that you have built, and said, right, this night you are going to lose your life. And I think for me, this moment that we are kind of currently living in made this story hit kind of home in a new way. We're living in a time of extreme sickness, and death has become a more common occurrence because of that. And it's just really disrupted so many of our kind of systems and rituals and life expectations. I know have been upended in so many different ways. And I think in this parable, Jesus is telling us and is obviously instructing his listeners, right, that don't store up your treasures on this earth. Instead, right at the very end, verse 21, but to store up your treasures, right, for God. And so in this moment, I'd like y'all to pause and briefly discuss how God has used the past 3 months to shine a new light on how you view and use your money. All right, so let's move on to our second section here in Luke 12, verses 22 through 28. He said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your lifespan? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon, in all his glory, was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith?" And in this moment, we see Jesus go immediately from the parable of, what's called the rich fool, who goes from wanting to store all of his goods to interpreting this for his disciples and for the crowd. And in this first sentence is something that really just hit me hard. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, or what you will wear. And I would say, for me, those are three things that I find myself worrying about constantly, and really for no reason. On a daily basis, I worry about these things, even though I have more than I could ever want or could ever really need. And so for these verses, they really, again, hit home for me, I think, in our specific moment, with so much kind of constant uncertainty in all. And Jesus says, do not worry. And he gives the example of ravens, right? Of these birds who don't have the ability to store. He says, they don't even have a barn like the guy in the previous story. And then he goes down to and uses the example of lilies, right? These beautiful flowers that are there, they're beautiful, and all of a sudden, immediately they are gone the next day, right? Thrown into the oven. And ultimately, Jesus kind of asks the question, right? What is the value of this? The verse that really again stood out to me is like, and can any verse? I guess verse 25. And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your lifespan? And obviously the answer to that is no. And I guess the kind of the opposite of that is, how many hours of your life can you spend worrying? And for me, it's a lot, right? I've wasted innumerable hours and days just being caught up in worry about this or about that, about my job, about my future. What am I going to do? What am I supposed to do? How am I going to do this? And in this moment, Jesus is realigning our expectations and realigning kind of how we are to live and view our world, right? That he's saying, the value of worry is nil, and makes it a faith issue, right? And at the end, he says, you who have little faith, right? And in this moment of realigning our expectations of the daily, he really is pushing us to be more aligned with his goals, right? His goal is for us to live and to follow him, and making this not a daily concern issue, but a faith issue. And so in your groups, I'd like you to kind of take a moment with these verses in mind and discuss what are things you are prone to worry about. And this doesn't need to be an extensive list, but I think it's something, one of those things of identifying the things that we worry about can be a helpful process to help us understand and see where we need to increase our faith in giving those things up to God. All right, let's jump into our last section of Luke 12, verse 29 through 34. And Jesus tells them, "And do not keep striving for what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying. For it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And so in this moment, Jesus realigns so much of our expectations and so much of our daily lives, so much time we spend out working, and work is good. We're called to work, and we're called to provide, and we need to do that. He's not saying don't go and work, just sit there and wait, but not to worry, right? To go do these things, but worrying about provision and God's provision is not what he's calling us to do, right? He's saying instead, strive for his kingdom. The end of our means should not be that we accumulate more, that we have more, that we get more, that we build bigger barns, that we buy and consume ourselves to our happiness. Instead, right, he turns this upside down onto this kind of kingdom perspective, right? Instead, strive for his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. And in this kind of the common image is that in given these things, we're not supposed to have a tight grip on them, but a loose hand. And by having this calling, we are to be his and his alone, and that we're not supposed to be of two minds and torn between these two demands, and through this we're called to really kind of resist these cultural demands that infect so many of our desires, and so much of our kind of American consumer culture does infect me and my desires. If I need to have this, I want to have this, I have to have this, and if I'm not going to be happy. And I think in this moment, Jesus really pokes some serious holes in our current cultural demands of that's not the goal, right? The end of our work and the end of our time here is not worry, is not to store up these things, but to live for his kingdom. And so the final question I will leave y'all with are, what are some ways you can live with Jesus as your greatest treasure to help you communicate the gospel to unbelievers? I hope y'all have a great week, and we will see y'all soon.